we have Cabfare with us, and I'd invite you to identify yourselves and your organisation, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is David Hamilton, and I am the General Manager, Strategy and Regulation with Cabfare and National Billing Group. And with me today is Arthur Argyropoulos.
Yes, thanks for the opportunity to talk here to you guys this afternoon.
Fire away.
Yep. I'm the founder and managing director of National Billing Group. We trade as Cabfare. We provide an electronic payment solution for the taxi and the limousine market nationally. And our largest install base of payment devices is in Victoria. We probably have approximately 1,000 terminals in the marketplace in Victoria.
Mm-hmm. So you have given us a submission, which we have read, but maybe you could talk about it, and maybe you had some other things to say.
Sure.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are two things that we actually wanted to talk about out of our submission, and I think we addressed one in some detail, which is the issue that we feel that the matter of fraud in this industry, in the payments side of the industry, has not been adequately addressed in the report, and that we feel that, in fact, some of the recommendations have the potential to exacerbate the problem in the industry. And why is fraud important? From our perspective, fraud drives up transaction costs. It compromises customer safety, card security, and leads to identity theft, and it therefore leads to increased prices. And we feel that this matter needs to be taken quite seriously in this industry. It's an industry where the vast majority of the transactions are in cash. About a third of it is in electronic transactions, and we're mainly concerned about fraud in the electronic area. We've indicated in our submission that it is advisable that the government moves out of trying to determine which devices should be in taxis for payment, which systems should be in taxis for payment, but rather it needs to address the problems of paper transactions, to create an environment where paper and card not present transactions can't occur in this industry. It's quite a serious matter. The costs are quite high to us. American Express, particularly as the only card issuer that targets this industry, is quite punitive in its approach, not only in terms of pricing of risk, but also in what's called chargebacks. It has a policy as a card company of, if any transaction is disputed at below $50, then that is automatically a chargeback. There is no dispute between, no avenue of dispute and reconciliation between American Express and the merchant ourselves. So, and the reasons for that is that they have flagged that this is an industry which has excessive amounts of paper-based transactions. So we believe that it's necessary going forward that we put in place an environment where, for non-cash transactions, then the matter of paper, removing paper-based transactions from the payment system is addressed, and also that the associated problem of card not present transactions are addressed. And we think there's three ways of tackling it. One is that you actually do nothing, which is the current practice. But more importantly, we think you could regulate that payment card industry standards need to be complied with for electronic and paper transactions. And if that is an option is pursued, then that will go a long way to remove these problems and address fraud in this industry. So how can it be done? As I said, regulate payment card industry certification for all providers of any form of payment, electronic or paper, in taxis and limousines and PBOs. That's decidedly different to saying we are going to determine which terminals or which devices can be used for payment. It simply is applying the standards that should be applied by the payment card industry. You can enforce compliance with that quite easily by simply contracting out the auditing of those standards to anybody who's participating in the industry. So there are auditors of PCI, of payment card industry standards, and they can be contracted and they can provide an assessment as to whether or not a company is complying. And it will ensure that the payment service providers meet all of their ATO compliance requirements as well. So we think there are quite a number of public benefits that flow from that. It lowers the risk profile for taxis and PBOs. The card merchant fees, we believe, can then be negotiated down, and that lowers passenger costs. It delivers a safer payment system for passengers, and it's a really very low-cost intervention for the state. It doesn't require any increase in staffing numbers, doesn't require an increase in budgeting. It can all be fitted within the existing framework of enforcement in the industry. So that was the first issue that we wanted to address. We felt that fraud does need to be tackled head-on. There is a large volume of paper transactions and a large volume of card-not-present transactions in this industry.
Can I just ask you for a moment, could you give us an example or two of the fraud you are talking about? And the other question is, I think I know what you mean with paper-based transactions, but just to clear that off, obviously it's not cash. Does that include all non-cash payments, or does it omit electronic transactions where you do get a piece of paper as a receipt or something?
The standards apply to all non-cash transactions,
Yep.
whether they be electronic or on what used to be called a click-clack machine.
Yeah.
So we're simply saying that the setting or applying payment card industry standards across both this entire sector
Yep.
addresses fraud and security issues, no matter who the provider of those services is.
Also, card-not-present transactions means that in some situations the PBO, the limousine operator, has the passenger's card details and considers it a higher level of service, not troubling the passenger for their card details, to, after the service is delivered, to process, either at home or back in the office, a card-not-present transaction with the passenger's card details. Payment card industry standards prohibit that. You cannot do that without having a procedure in place of how these card details are destroyed after such a transaction occurs. The current practice is that operators have card details in their diaries, for example, and these diaries might get lost, fall in the wrong hands, and the card holder might get defrauded. So we advocate a regime, a way of operating whereby these practices, practices in the past, are not used going forward.
Presumably that's with the customer's agreement, but are you saying there's a breach of what would it be? A merchant agreement or there's a code that covers it?
There's payment card industry standards are defined by Visa and MasterCard, and their security certifications or compliance that a merchant needs to comply to have a merchant facility with an acquirer or a bank. As time goes on, the banks are going to, and the acquirers are going to be more stringent about the requirement to meet PCI compliance. What we're advocating is that the taxi inquiry should follow that same line and say for this industry that here are some standards. They apply equally to all merchants in all industries. However, in this industry, to improve the risk profile of this industry and what the community considers the risk profile of this industry, to actually do something and be seen to be doing something to improve its risk profile. The end result is the merchant service fee assessed by the card issuers will reduce. And that gives the opportunity for those benefits to be passed on to the consumers.
Yep. Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. So on with your second general point.
Just on that though, are you saying that there needs to be something in place that goes beyond the general, if you like, protections on those payment systems? I understood you were arguing the case that those general sort of protections should be there, but sort of suggesting that you were going beyond that for taxis.
It's simply the government saying that to be a payment provider in the taxi and the PBO marketplace, you need to be compliant with these payment card industry standards. Eventually, the banks and the acquirers are going to impose this on all merchants in all markets. We'd like to think that the government, who wants to clean up this market and wants to do the right thing by the community and passengers, would advocate that now. And this is a great opportunity with this inquiry to be seen to be cleaning up the fraud in this industry.
I think there's a separate but related matter which it revolves around the requirements of the Australian Taxation Office. At present, this state and requires that the receipts that are produced in taxis and limousines comply with the requirements of the ATO. The ATO's got some very specific requirements for this industry because it itself views it as a high-risk industry given the volume of cash that is associated with it. So we think that we're just a little concerned that in some of the interpretation of some of the draft recommendations, it could be perceived that those requirements may have been going to come out of the regulations. In fact, we think they should stay within the regulations as part of a package to address the issues of fraud.
I don't think it was the intention, but maybe which one are you referring to specifically?
I think we were concerned that the recommendations associated with electronic transactions or electronic payment systems could result in that, in terms of, I think at present the regulations which catch that up are ones in which the decisions or the mandating of what equipment can be in a taxi. So it was just a concern that if you took that out of the regulations, an unintended consequence may be that the reporting requirements and receipt requirements with respect to the ATO could just get swept up by error.
Yeah.
So I don't think it was not an overt statement in there.
Yeah.
It was more the potential unintended consequence of what would occur.
Yep.
So what we're advocating, in fact, is to leave that there and remove the mandating of equipment, but state that any provider of any service should meet quite reasonable standards with respect to payment card industry.
Yep.
And that then enabled innovation and new entrants to come into this industry without fear or without being prescribed out.
I think we're on the same page.
Yeah. Good. I think the second issue that we just wanted to address briefly was a competition issue. And this, I think, goes to the heart of, I think it's some of the proposals with respect to the surcharge service fees in payment systems. And I think in thinking this through, it's a question that we feel that the Commission needs to consider the competition problem as the starting point for analysis as to what the intervention needs to be. And we've looked at this and we think that in terms that we effectively have a bottleneck problem, that this is not dissimilar to bottleneck problems which occur in all sorts of regulated assets, whether they be rail or gas or telecommunications. And that bottleneck problem relates to the fact that there are no access arrangements with respect to the cab charge payment system. There are access arrangements with respect to the major cards that are regulated by the Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank has put in place access arrangements. It's recently refreshed those to come into play from the 1st of January next year. And it's moved to I think probably if you look at those recommendations, they've moved to an access arrangement which enables the access seeker and the card providers to negotiate a bilateral arrangement as to what should be the reasonable costs that should be recovered for accessing those cards. At present, the cab charge card is not a designated card or it's not regulated by the RBA. And that in itself creates a number of downstream structural problems in the industry. It ensures that if that card, which has about $430 million of taxi fares are processed across that system, that card can only be processed across the cab charge network, cab charge terminals at present. There are no access arrangements that have been designated by the RBA, and as a result, that card ensures that those terminals have to be, as by default, in any taxi or and/or a click-clack machine, frequently in limousines. And I think that's, in fact, Cab Charge makes that point to the Commission in its the material that it submitted to you in December last year with respect to the 10% service fee. So we are concerned that one of the interventions that the Commission probably needs to give consideration to is the establishment of access arrangements with respect to those cards or those payment mechanisms which are not currently the subject of an RBA access arrangement.
And I just should know this, but it wouldn't get picked up under the the Competition and Consumer Act access arrangements?
No, because it's probably not. I don't think the NCC would designate it as a facility of national importance, and you'd sort of keep falling apart. So going through part 3 would be a little bit difficult.
That's my impression.
Yeah, but the RBA's legislation does enable it to designate a payment system,
Yep.
provided that it's in the interests of protecting or protecting the payment system of Australia. Now, I think the cab charge system doesn't fall within that ambit, or they've taken the view that it's not significant enough for them. But it is a bespoke card. It's a card which structurally ensures that terminal that processes that, whilst it is the only terminal that will process it, has to be in every taxi, just as the multi-purpose taxi program arrangements have reinforced that same pattern in Victoria. So we believe that one thing that you perhaps could give consideration to, and is that in terms of the arrangements with the ESC and fare setting, and the ESC being able to determine fares, etc., independently of government as a regulator, that it also be given the ability to determine access arrangements with respect to cab charge cards. That would then undo the classic bottleneck problem that I think we face, and that access is the key to solving the bottlenecks.
Does this mean you've given up trying to get access through cab charge itself?
We have made several applications. We have even offered ECPR pricing, which, as we know, provides the most beneficial arrangements for an access provider commercially, but there is a condition in cab charge's internal arrangements which requires you to provide a facility which they deem to provide the same customer experience as the customer on your network and terminals as the customer would have on their networks and terminals. I don't, we know that from where you've got multi-product companies where one of the products is access, and one of the products then is some of the other products are downstream products, that either structural separation needs to occur, which is not possible to enforce in Australia, unlike the US, but more importantly, be able to provide access. And we also know that over time, those access products may in fact prove more beneficial for them than being in downstream competition.
So are you raising the possibility of structural separation at the state level? State regulation? I think that enforcing a structural separation would be somewhat difficult, but I think creating an environment where an access arrangement could be provided by the state is a viable public policy outcome. And I think that we know the methodologies then to determine access pricing. We know the sorts of issues which need to be addressed, and that then would overcome a major competition problem in this industry. Our belief is that we have in the payment card system high levels of competition. It's where innovation is occurring. At present,
unless you can have access to the total market, we can, as a result of that, you will then see new products, more and more innovation occur with respect to payment systems and for instance, direct relationships between passengers and the payment system provider. At present, the driver acts as the gatekeeper because the terminal has become the focus of competition. So I think, in response to your question, I think that going forward to government with a recommendation that access arrangements be made available or be able to be prescribed for this particular asset class should be considered.
And just in relation to the terms and conditions of access, so perhaps it's not. I was going to ask you about the 5% that we'd proposed instead of the 10% service charge.
Well, we clearly believe that there are two approaches. I think the 5%. I noticed that in the submissions that the Commission's received, I think it's E479, which is not a submission from ourselves, goes to great detail to identify the cost structures that particular company faces. We also note that there are elements, there's quite an amount in the cab charge submission from December 2011. Our view is that determining a cost or imposing a price cap is never, whilst it is a regulatory outcome, it's not going to provide the most efficient regulatory outcomes. It will, we agree, most likely lead to two defined outturns. The first will be that the current levels of commission which we pay to drivers, those levels will reduce, could go to zero, and those benefits, therefore the benefit will move through to end users by way of a lower fare, where they pay by electronic means. That's undoubtedly the case. However, we think that the detriments that arise from just an arbitrary price cap are such that you will see the exit of most of the alternative providers from the competitive sector, and that will simply reinforce a single supplier, to wit cab charge. Our modelling would substantiate that as an outcome at the sorts of levels you've been talking about.
But you could survive on a 5%?
We are not making any comment about whether or not we could or couldn't. That has to do with the commercial arrangements that we would be putting in place. But it is extremely difficult without access. Without access, quite a large amount of this market is excluded from a third-party supplier.
Yeah.
So before one could even contemplate building or imposing a price cap, one needs to think about providing access. I mean, the literature is clear that access plus a price cap will allow competitors then to sort out and to determine where they'll end up. But the literature also suggests that it just results in tacit collusion, that you all float to the same point, which is, we could say, has occurred to date.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah.
I was going to ask, there was seemed to be a suggestion that that reducing the service fee would somehow promote fraud. What's the story there?
No, I think that wasn't our intent, that reducing... It's the other changes that come about in the... without the application of standards, we believe that will increase the level of fraud.
Okay.
It's not a question of reducing the service fee will result in that.
Okay.
That wasn't our intent in our drafting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much for your time, gentlemen.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll certainly be